As I said, I'm Marty Oppenheimer, class of 1971, and I want to welcome everybody to this Road to the Future program of Oberlin Women Athletes 1966 to 1976 pre and post Title IX experiences. The Road to the Future, RTTF, programs are organized by a planning team of volunteers from these three classes, 70, 71, and 72. And they were they're a continuation of the Road to the Reunion programs that you might have seen last year that led up to finally our on-site, on-campus reunion last June. We started those programs to gauge and reconnect members of our classes because COVID had postponed the on-campus reunions for many of us, and we felt we needed to reconnect with everybody. And we're going to try to continue these programs as long as there seems to be interest. There's been a variety of different programs. And also, we don't come up with all the ideas. We've had members of our team join because they had ideas, and you don't have to join the team. But if you have an idea of a program that you think is of interest to your members of your class, let your class officers know, and you can find them on your class website. Before turning the program over to our moderator, Heather Partridge Oppenheimer, class of 71, I'm going to go over a few logistics. First of all, we ask you to keep your microphone muted during all the presentations, unless you're called on to ask a question out loud or to give a comment, and then you can unmute it and remember to mute it afterward. And then later in the program, there's going to be time to ask questions of the panelists, and there will be a number of ways of doing that. First of all, you can ask a question anytime by going to the chat part of your Zoom screen, and it might look different on different screens. Sometimes the chat is a little rectangular thought bubble type looking thing, and there's also you might have to go to more, where it says more on your screen, to open up and find chat. That's also where you can find the place to raise your hand. When we get into the actual question and answer part, you can hit that raise your hand button.
Or it might be under reactions.
Oh, that's right. Under reactions, it looks like a little smiley face with a plus sign at the top. Or you might, again, have to go to the more. And you'll raise your hand, and then Dave and I will try to keep track of who's next for asking a question. If you have trouble with that, as a last resort, when we get to that, physically raise your hand, and we'll try to see you. But with 40 or 50 people on, we'll keep kind of circling around trying to find you. Finally, I want to just thank our 5 panelists who will get introduced in a few minutes, and our moderator, for being willing to share their experiences. A lot of these are pretty personal, and they'll share what they feel like sharing, but we thank them for their willingness to do this. It took quite a bit of planning on their part. And then also from the Office of Alumni Engagement, I want to thank Jill Robinson, who just got off of it, and Deb Stanfield, who have been providing like administrative and technical support. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Heather, and we'll take a minute because we're in the same room. I got to mute myself, turn down my volume so there's no feedback.
Your volume first. Unmute. All right, I think I'm unmuted, and his volume is off. So hi, I'm Heather Oppenheimer, class of 71. I was Heather Partridge when I was at Oberlin. I was fortunate to attend a high school where girls and boys had the same level of support for participation in sports, both with fans and money and everything else. But when I arrived at Oberlin in the fall of 1967, I discovered that wasn't typical. At Oberlin College, the first to grant bachelor's degrees to women in a co-education program, the playing field was literally different for men and girls, as we were called at the time. I felt honored to be allowed to manage the men's lacrosse team, although I hadn't thought doing that in high school was anything out of the ordinary. I appreciated being allowed to eat at the training table with the men, although all the other dining halls were closed, they wouldn't have been able to eat otherwise. It didn't particularly upset me that I was not allowed to ride the bus to away games, although I was expected to be there and had to find my own transportation. And I didn't know that male managers, not female, not only received a varsity letter, but also received an hour of A credit in PE. About 20 years later, Fred Schultz presented me with a varsity lacrosse letter jacket, which my granddaughter wears, but I never did get those hours of A in PE on my transcript. A different playing field was still the case when I graduated in 1970, but in 1972, President Nixon signed Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 into law. Title IX became mandatory in 1978, although regulations weren't finalized until 1988. Interestingly, although most people think of Title IX in terms of women's sports, nothing in the law actually mentions athletics or sports. But it sure was easy to prove disparity between men's and women's athletic budgets. Tonight, you'll hear from 5 women athletes who attended Oberlin just before and just after Title IX was passed. We aren't going to repeat everything that was in our bios, so if you haven't had time to read them, I highly recommend taking a look after we finish. They were in some of the emails that came out before. These people's stories capture some of the shifts in support for, participation in, and attitudes toward Oberlin women in sports during that turbulent time. Our speakers tonight are Sue Schaffer, men's and women's swimming and women's club basketball, 1966 to 1970. Kate Wall, men's cross country, men's track, 1966 to 68 with a break, and then 1969 to 71, and women's club basketball, 1971. Jane Littmann, women's fencing, basketball, field hockey, and lacrosse, 1968 to 1972. Lisa Matovcik, men's cross country, women's track and basketball, 1972 to 76. And Margaret Cheney, women's diving and tennis, 1972 to 1976. I'm going to be sitting here with the hook, so everyone only has 5 minutes to speak, but I'm sure you're going to really enjoy them. We're going to start with the pre-Title IX athletes. So Sue, take it away. I'm going on mute.
Thanks, Heather. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending, for your interest in women's sports history at Oberlin. And thank you also to the people who've been instrumental in organizing this, particularly Dave Tempest, Doug Rose, and Marty and Heather Oppenheimer. I mentioned in my bio that I came late to swimming success. I started swimming at 13 and won my first high school state championship medal as a senior. I wasn't ready to quit, but in those days, women almost never swam competitively after age 18. Since Oberlin had no women's swim program, I went to the men's coach, Ralph Bibler, and asked to train with the men. He said no. I don't remember the exact progression of events, but it didn't take long for the team captains to step in, and soon I was training with the guys 4 days a week. Why only 4? Because on Fridays, the men swam naked in preparation for their Saturday meets. I wasn't welcome. Other than to train, I had no privileges, equipment, or recognition, and no opportunities to compete. Furthermore, in exchange for training, I was expected to work at every home meet, usually as a timer. Not a problem since I loved the meets. Most of the swimmers were vaguely friendly to me, but they didn't become friends or feel like teammates. And some of them certainly looked at me askance, especially at the beginning. However, I didn't feel diminished or belittled or ignored. I was just happy to swim. I'm not sure why I didn't train with the men the following years, but it was probably a combination of not feeling a part of anything and training with no end since I couldn't compete. There were no local or summer AAU meets.
I don't want to interrupt you hearing this. She said something about swimming.
Oh. All I remember, I'm sorry, there were no local or summer or AAU meets for my age. So junior year, I decided to start a women's team. All I remember of that process is that I had to convince the women's athletic director and had to take whatever time the department could scrounge up for us, which I think was an hour 3 nights a week around 9 p.m. A faculty sponsor, Mary Culhane, was assigned to us. She didn't know swimming, so I recruited as our coach my good friend, 3-sport athlete and football and baseball star, Fred Manier. He knew something about swimming because his sister was a successful swimmer, and he knew a lot about competitive sports and teams. We had a small handful of totally inexperienced swimmers, possibly around 8, and we had a few meets where we swam sprint distances only. We had no team suits or caps or meals. I don't remember how we got to meets, but there was no team bus. We certainly didn't get letters. If I have my facts right, Oberlin belonged to the AIAW, the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, and their division of girls and women's sports held a national meet in the spring. The meet that year was in Indiana, close enough for us to attend, and it had no qualifying times yet. Mary Culhane drove us in a van, and we spent the nights on the basement floor at one of our swimmers' homes. We were way outclassed, but the trip was fun. So that's swimming. I also played a little basketball. We didn't have girls' teams at my high school in Birmingham, Alabama, but we had phys ed and we played girls' rules, in which we had 2 guards who defended on the opponent's half of the court, 2 forwards who tried to score on our half, and 2 rovers who could go full court. Everyone was allowed a maximum of 3 dribbles. Oberlin had advanced to boys' rules, and I knew how to dribble because I had played in the driveway with my brothers. I didn't know how to shoot a layup, but I had a nice outside shot, so I was asked to play in a game against another school, and I did several of those. We were not very good, and we didn't have a feeling of being a team. We didn't even have uniforms. We were just a bunch of women brought together for a game. The athletic highlight of the year for women was the Yale-Princeton intra-school basketball game. Lots of students attended and picked sides. I never stopped to wonder why our women represented teams named for, at that time, all-male schools. But I co-captained a team my senior year, and I had a blast. And that's my Oberlin athletics story. I'm done.
Hey, thanks, Sue. That was really great. It sounded really familiar to me, too. So next we have Kate Wall. So Kate, unmute yourself, Kate.
I had not competed in any sport per se, although our whole family was very athletic. And as I got older, there were fewer and fewer opportunities to exercise at all through the town recreation department or anything. And in New York State, high school competition for girls was prohibited. So there are no girls teams. Let me get my notes out. So one of the questions we were told to think about is, how did you wind up on the training with the Oberlin men's cross country and track teams? I sort of accidentally started running with the boys cross country and track teams the middle of my junior year in high school. I really had no intention of doing it. I'd been on a 4-week bike ride the previous summer and felt the need to get a lot more aerobic exercise, but I just was leaving school, paused for a few minutes, and was watching the boys team training on the school driveway, which was our track. And I did that for a few days, just standing there and watching. And the next day, the 3rd or 4th day, the coach came to me and said, if you want to run with them, just put your gym suit on and show up tomorrow. A couple of decades later, he told me he thought I'd quit after a few days, but that didn't happen. And I kept running. And I was allowed to train with them and go on the team bus with them and acted as a manager at their away meets, which I was not allowed to do in terms of the bus at Oberlin. Let me just find where I am here. Let's see. So after a while, the coach realized I was serious about it and I was working hard. And he said, why don't you join the women's AAU so you can compete in meets? And I said, what's the AAU? Some of you are going to laugh, but I really had no idea what it was. So I did that. But to get track meets, even a couple of times a month, this was a New York suburb, north of New York. Meets were New York City, Long Island, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, just a couple of races a month. My
Zoom meeting.
What? Anyway, so I started doing well. Actually, from the beginning, I did well in the 880-yard run, which is a half mile and 1,500 meters, and continued.
Women in sports that are my age.
Heather. Oh, okay. I'll pick up from there. Sorry, I don't know what that was. So my senior year, I was not allowed to train with the boys team anymore. I was very upset. I knew it had something to do with the football coach. I learned at some reunion years later, he threatened to quit coaching football if the new principal let me continue to train with the boys. So I was a full-time manager of all three boys teams, three seasons. And my coach gave me my own workout after the boys. It was really tough on grades, I'll tell you. But so then I really was a full-time manager and went to all their away meets as well as home meets, and continued to compete on my own on weekends when I could find a meet and get a ride. But by the time I graduated from high school, I'd qualified for the women's national track and field championships and ran the 1500 meters in that race. And I'd also run in Madison Square Garden in 80 yards race then, not yards. And I wanted to go to a college that had a women's track and cross country team. Every single college I applied to said, no, we don't. My backup school said, there's one woman who runs around campus, we'll give you her address. Anyway, Oberlin's coach said I could, and that's how it started. Bill Tidwell was a wonderful coach. He made the US Olympic team as the alternate in the 800 meters one year, I think in the early 50s, 52 maybe. But got injured playing pickup basketball. But he was really a wonderful coach.
You have about 1 minute left
Sorry.
on your 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I got interrupted. Okay, so I trained with the men at Oberlin. Did not go to their away meets except one time when I found a ride, and I knew I couldn't eat at the athletes' dinner at South Hall. So the only way to make dinner was to take a really short shower and ride my bike really fast to my dining hall. And Heather, I was amazed when you'd learned that somehow you'd managed to do that. Okay, so I think I'm almost done here. One thing that was in common between the boys on the high school team and the men on the Oberlin team, only one boy on the boys teams in high school definitely resented me and was vocal about it. I felt very comfortable with the men on the Oberlin team, became friends with many of them, went for a midnight run with some of them at a reunion, had to borrow some clothes from them. And when the school photographer came to take pictures for the yearbook or some records of the team, I was just sort of hanging around in my sweats. And the men on the team insisted that they take a picture of me too, because they weren't going to. It wasn't with the team, but it was a picture of me at the track. So I think
Thanks, Kate.
that's enough for now. Yeah, thank you.
Yep, I'm going to move on to Jane Littmann. Jane, you want to unmute yourself?
Got it. Thank you, Heather, and everyone who put this program together. All 4 of my years at Oberlin were pre-Title IX. I started fencing partway through my sophomore year just to satisfy a PE requirement. I'm still fencing today, 53 years later. After graduating from Oberlin, I competed for 2 decades. My competition highlights included making 2 U.S. World Championship teams, earning medals at the U.S. Nationals in all 3 weapons, being the top-ranked women's épée fencer in North America for 2 seasons, and earning the first A classification ever awarded to women's épée. Today, I'm still active as a coach. I have my own club. I referee locally and nationally, and though retired from my full-time career as a licensed clinical psychologist, I continue in that realm too. So let me tell you how it all began. At Oberlin, there was only a 1-semester intro class for women. My drill partner, classmate Debbie LaPere, who's online here, vowed that she would start a women's fencing team, and I bolstered her efforts. We convinced Eric Sossman from the men's team to coach us, which he did brilliantly, for an hour and a half, 5 days a week. They took me to Cleveland for my first competitions. They ignited my passion and built the solid foundation for my game. Institutionally, to my knowledge, we had no budget. We borrowed gear from the men's team. Women's participation on teams did not earn credit or other recognition. So for a one-time 1-hour credit, I concocted an independent reading course called Competitive Fencing. Similarly, our women's basketball team had no uniforms. We played in our own cutoffs and any white blouse, but we got to vote my freshman year to play full court rather than women's rules. Yes, I did notice the disparity in women's and men's treatment and eligibilities in sports at that time. I could not grasp why that was. It simply did not make sense to me. The same was true in women's fencing, and I pushed back hard against the restrictions and exclusions. Women were only allowed to compete in foil, and they were prohibited from competing in épée or saber. One official high up in the international organization told me, I do not understand why women would want to compete in épée or saber. It can be brutal. You must write an article for, and he mentioned his country's magazine, explaining why women would want to fence épée and saber. I told him it would be a very short article, same reasons as the men. Some coaches I approached for lessons said flatly, no, I won't waste my time. There is no international competition for women in épée or saber. If you are serious, you will stay in foil. To which I replied, there will be international women's competition when more coaches are willing to seriously teach women épée and saber. Another prohibition forbade women and men from competing against one another in official local competitions. At one point, I was told when trying to schedule these that the next time I stepped on a competition strip for one of these events, the men from a certain club had been instructed to see to it that I would be carried off. I thought they were joking, but 2 men from other clubs had heard the same, and they assured me it was not a joke. As more tournaments with men and women were held, and I was in a different region, I perplexed some of the organizers by winning their tournament after they had graciously purchased both a first place award for the winner and a first place award for the highest finishing woman. Well, this led the highest placing man to ask when he received the silver medal, well, do I also get the award for the highest placing woman? So it's been a rewarding and difficult journey at times. I'm deeply grateful to many coaches and friends and fellow barrier breakers and bridge builders, including supporters like Oberlin's government professor George Lanyi and his wife Susie, who supported me through sending me fencing articles for years and translated those from their native Hungarian. So one last thing, though I retired from competition in 1992, women's épée and saber were added to the Olympic Games in 96 and 2004. And finally, for the first time next year, 2024 in Paris, there will be individual and team events for men and for women in all 3 weapons. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. That was great. nice closing and impact on the sport in general. So now we're going to move to post-Title IX. Now remember that Title IX came in 1972, but the regulations weren't finalized till 1978, and then the mandatory in 1978, and then regulations in 1988. So the 1972 is the cusp, not when things really completely changed. So we're going to start with Lisa Matovcik. So Lisa, you're unmuted, and I'll mute myself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's great to see everyone here. So what I'd do is tell a story about what happened one day in 1973. Before I do that, I just want to give a shout out to Dan Millman and say hello and say how much I enjoyed taking his classes back in the day. I learned as much in the athletic department as I did in the academics, how to be focused, how to see big pictures, a lot about character. So yeah, the Oberlin athletic experience was a great one. 1973, I was a college sophomore and running on the cross country team. Hi, Coach Michaels. Good to see you. You're part of this story. There was a three-way home meet at Oberlin. And when I got on the starting line, the Ohio Wesleyan coach came over and said, if she runs, well, I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically, if she runs, I'm taking my boys and going home. And that was because the Ohio Athletic Conference rules clearly stated eligibility was for any male undergraduate. And I didn't fit the profile, and I guess he was offended by my gender. Now, I had been training with the men's cross country team. We ran on weekends. We went to the apple orchards. We picked apples. We were just a team. It wasn't like I wasn't part of the team. Everyone was great. But the Ohio Wesleyan coach decided to enforce the rules. Now, what happened was really an Oberlin experience. My recollection is that Coach Michaels called everyone together and said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, he said, well, if Lisa runs, he's taking his boys and going home. And there was a team meeting. And we said, what are we going to do as a team? And the guys on the team said, well, she's part of the team. If she doesn't run, we don't run either. And so I got on the starting line. He did not take his boys and go home, but he did run the meet under protest because we were breaking the Ohio Athletic Conference rules. So something had to be done about this. Over the summer, during the year, actually, I got a Ford Foundation grant to challenge the Ohio Athletic Conference rule under Title IX. And over the summer, it was quietly repealed. So the male eligibility requirement was removed. And the lesson here is that things just didn't happen because there was a law passed. It had to be challenged, and people have to be the change makers. So that's my story about 1973. I think it was better to be post than pre Title IX, and I'm grateful for that. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. Great story. I'm unmuted, I think. I said thanks, Lisa. Great story. Hope we heard it, because it was. And our final panelist tonight is Margaret Cheney. And she's going to, after she speaks, we'll have a chance to have I have some questions for the panelists, and then we'll follow that with some open questions for everybody. There's an interesting comment from Dan Millman, who said, I was a casual jogger and quite impressed when Lisa mentioned she'd run to Elyria and back. Okay, so anyway, Margaret, welcome.
No, well, thanks everybody for organizing this and coming and participating. So the way I ended up in athletics at Oberlin, I had started out doing AAU, doing tennis and diving, either AAU or high school before Oberlin. And the diving was really important to me. So when I was deciding which college to go to, I called two competing colleges and asked, so do you have a women's diving team? And the other college said no. And the person I talked to at Oberlin said, well, our women's swim team has been expanding in recent years. I'm reasonably sure that if you came here, you'd have an opportunity to dive. So I came to Oberlin. And when I arrived, it was clear that Oberlin was just kind of figuring out the women's athletics stuff. You know, the part of the women's locker room had been taken over from the men's faculty locker room, and there were still urinals there. And there was this big plastic sheet that was dividing most of the men's locker room from the equipment window and so forth. But at least as far as diving, we did have a coach. Dan Millman was there. And so he was wonderful. You know, he taught the gymnastics classes and also coached me in diving. And then Dick Michaels was wonderful. He was very welcoming. And I think the first year we didn't have any women's meets, but then, so I remember diving exhibition at the men's meets. But then later, the women's team got going and started having meets and so forth. And it was still very sort of, there was one regional meet that we went to that in which it turned out the 3-meter board wasn't even a regulation board. I mean, you would never find this in AAU competition, and it was a little dangerous actually because the divers had practiced their dives assuming a board with normal response, and all of a sudden they couldn't make their dives, and so it was a little hairy. but and then the coaching in tennis was it was mostly, okay, girls, come on, let's play. And that was kind of the extent of the coaching. So, but at least we had a team and we traveled and competed and stuff, and it was really great. So the athletics was really wonderful for me. For me, it was a sense of belonging on the team, but then also I think sports in general, you learn that you can do things that you never thought you could do. You could do things that you're terrified of doing. And that's a valuable lesson for the rest of life. At Oberlin, I never felt as if I really achieved my full potential, at least certainly in diving. And so then I continued diving, or I took a long break, and then I came back later in my 40s and started diving in masters. And one of the things that's really surprising in the masters diving community is right at my age group, there's this big discontinuity in the women's competition. The divers who are older, there aren't very many of them, and they're not that good. And the divers that are younger, there are lots of them, and they're very good. And so it's very obvious in the masters diving competitions that there was a big change right when Title IX was implemented, was passed. Okay, that's all.
Thanks, Margaret. I see a comment in here from Dan Millman. As Margaret knows, there's a section in one of my books I called the Margaret analogy as a metaphor for the process of learning. So we're going to move to the panel discussion where I'm going to ask questions and call on people. Margaret just talked a little bit about how learning was important to her and how what she did in sports was affected her Oberlin experience. And Lisa also mentioned that. So, Sue, how did participation in sports affect your Oberlin experience?
It was fun. Even though there were no organized sports, it was fun to be able to swim, to have our little meets. It was fun to play a couple of basketball games. I wished there had been more. I can't say that I ever felt slighted that there were men's teams and not women's teams. I just wasn't that tuned in to the fact that the guys were getting something I wasn't getting at that point. It wasn't until after I graduated that I became more aware of differences and began to wonder why there was so much less. And also in AAU swimming, women and girls and boys were treated identically. So in my swimming life, other than Oberlin, I had that experience anyway. So I still swim today. I played basketball for years after Oberlin until my knees gave out and I had kids and that sort of thing. But I competed and was pretty good for a number of years, maybe 15, 20 years. And I still train almost every day.
Thank you. Okay, let's see, I'm going to hit Lisa. How, if at all, did your participation specifically, we know how Jane's participation changed expectations, but how did yours change expectations on how women in sports were treated at Oberlin and in general?
Oh, in general, it made all the difference in the world. As a teenager, I was 17 or 18 at that time. And the idea that I was able to train and compete validated not only me as a runner, as an athlete, but at that age as a person. I mean, if things had turned out differently, the message would have been, you can't do this. You don't have agency in the world. And it was a formative experience for me to be able to participate in sports, particularly cross country at Oberlin. I do run to this day. I've run many marathons. I'm not fast anymore, but I still enjoy it. So yes, it made all the difference in the world.
And you made a difference too by getting women added to the, instead of saying only men could compete. Kate, I've got one for you. Was there an Oberlin coach, professor, administrator, or other staff member who particularly encouraged or hindered your participation in sports? You're on mute. There we go.
The person who greatly encouraged me was Coach Tidwell, who was a wonderful coach and a really ethical person. Years later, I heard that townspeople criticized him at a meeting for letting me wear official Oberlin workout clothes and running on public roads. And he stood up to them and supported that. The one discouraging thing was I tried to start a women's cross country or track team at Oberlin. No one in PE helped me or steered me to anyone else. They basically said, give up, it can't be done. And that was discouraging. I can't think of any one particular person who hindered me. Well, I guess the hindrance was a structural hindrance, like not being able to go to the team meals, not being able to get what the men had, which I didn't even know existed, like credits and things, not being able to go to the weigh meets of the team I trained with every single day. But the team experience itself, I loved running with the teams, and they seemed to like having me there instead of resenting me. So
Thank you.
That's it.
Thanks. I got one for Jane too. Let's see. Where did I lost it? Just a minute. Well, I know. How did your participation in sports affect your overall Oberlin experience? You told us a lot about pre and post Oberlin in the sports, but what about when you were other parts of Oberlin?
It was wonderful. And that's why I'm so glad that there are these more opportunities now. I had really enjoyed sports growing up and continuing, and it's just so important to get those breaks from whatever the books and the rest, and get that physical exercise. The teams, the relationships that you build on those teams is like nothing else, and it made a huge difference in all aspects. I know that's a little general, but that's kind of the way the physical exercise works. It just clears your mind. Even if you were exhausted before, you have more energy. So I was very grateful to have the experiences that I did.
Thanks. Yeah, that I'm trying to do three things at once and keep track of it. Yeah, Debbie Lapierre. Thanks, Jane. Sorry, I'm getting very confused here, right? Without looking at all of this stuff. Debbie Lapierre says, I have a question for Heather. I was a men's team manager, armorer for the fencing team. You were a men's team manager. How common was that? I'm 1968-73. Well, I know that I think it was the first year that I did it, which was the spring of 68. My first year there, I was written up by the OAC, Ohio Athletic Conference, coaches and referees and stuff as being the first female manager. So I guess it wasn't that common. So it was interesting because I was not allowed to go into the locker room, but I ran the drills and they were in the best shape ever when I was the manager, I'll tell you. I made them work hard. So, and Larry Abraham says, I'm curious to know who was coaching women's tennis when it started up after Title IX. I'm wondering whether it was Sally Houston. Does anybody know that? Margaret, you were raising your hand there? Oops, she just disappeared on us.
Let's see. I accidentally hit the.
Yeah.
Here we go. Yeah. So I think when I started, it was Tony Renfro, who was she was the wife of one of the chemistry faculty, I believe. And then a year, or maybe it was 2 years later, then it was Claudia Colville. and the two of them sort of, I think it was sort of coaching and assistant coach for a while.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know what I was going to say on the changes is that and how athletics are helpful. Our new director of athletics, Natalie Winkelfuss, is that how her name's pronounced? Is very, very focused on having all Oberlin students do some sort of athletics and sports, whether it's team sports or competitive sports or personal yoga and Pilates and things like that, because she agrees with Jane that it's a really important part of your academic experience. Gary Kvistad asked, what were the athletic facilities like at Oberlin back then compared to now? I'd like to have one of the panelists raise your hand on that if you'd like to say something. We did hear about the women's swimming team having a sheet next to where they were changing. Anybody else? Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, I remember that the men were able to get towels and we had to bring our own.
Anybody else want to add to that one?
I agree.
Margaret?
Oh, so I think that was probably because the equipment window was in the men's locker room, and so that there was this sheet that was dividing the equipment window from the men's locker room, so the women could sneak in and get to the equipment room. I don't know how it is now, having been lately.
Jane?
So were you all in Phillips? Because I don't think Phillips existed quite when we were there.
Yeah, this was Phillips. Yeah.
So we were in really old facilities.
Hales?
Hales and
older.
And say again?
And older than Hales.
And older than Hales is right. Debbie has, great experience. I hope you'll chime in, having been a manager and involved in the team as well.
We were in, what was it, Warner? I don't remember, the big, huge, old building. And the armory room and the equipment room was in the basement. And I was armorer and I was allowed to be there. I wasn't allowed in the locker room either, but they had to come to me to get towels and jock straps and all the rest of the equipment. Okay, here's your foil, here's your epee, here's your jock strap, here's your towel. All right, that was something I had to do from the basement. Now, neither Jane nor I can remember. I must have repaired the women's equipment too, because nobody else was there to do it. But, we didn't get towels. And the facilities, in 1973, we shared fencing facilities with the men and trained with them. But in 72, we did not. I was on the bus.
Yeah, if there was a training table, I never knew about it.
Yeah, that was a big secret. I think Fred was the only coach that actually let that secret out. I can't remember. I know there was a big argument over whether I could go to the awards dinner at the end of the year because there wasn't an issue about whether I'd be able to eat or not. So, would we really want to have a girl there? I don't know. Anyway,
now that's one of the differences between fencing and all the other sports. We had no buses. We had no awards dinner. We had no food. Okay, we begged them to give us to do one last training meal for the football team and give that to us because it doubled our budget. All sports are not created equal.
Okay, I think we pretty much we are open to other questions. I'm trying to see some other ones here. Marty, want to pick one? Oh, Marty has one. Question for the men athletes. If you were on any teams with any of these women athletes, besides him who married one, what was that experience like? Were you aware of the differences between the men's and women's opportunities? So if you want to answer this one, please respond by raising your hand in the reactions or on the screen.
Oh, Larry.
Larry,
Hello?
you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Dick Michaels.
Okay, Larry Abrahams and then Dick Michaels. So I start with Dick and then we'll go to Larry. Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah. Lisa was on our cross country team, as you know, and as time went on, we had more and more women join in. And the thing was that many of them had never been on any type of varsity team in high school. They didn't have anything in high school. And so to get them into a varsity sort of experience, it took a while to set in. And the NCAC, oh no, it was the Ohio Athletic Conference then.
OAC.
Yeah, the OAC started a women's conference meet and made the coach from Wesleyan set the meet up. And so anyhow, I was all excited about our women having a chance to be a team for the OAC championships. I could not get 5 women to come back from fall break to participate. And it made me really mad for all of the time we put in to try to get women into the varsity experience. And anyhow, so the next year, in the fall meeting, I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I know a lot of you have not played varsity sports before, but here are the rules. And if I ask you to come back for the conference meet, you will come back for the conference meet. And they did.
Okay. I'm going to pass on. I think Larry Abrahams is next, and then we'll get David Shipley and David Tempest. Oh, Fawcett, sorry, Nathan Fawcett.
So I was in the class of 71, ran cross country and track for most of those years. I was the manager one year, but I remember Kate being out training with the team and trying to find ways to compete. So I certainly remember that she was out there for many of those years.
Okay, thank you. David Shipley? All right, we just had David Shipley, sorry. Yeah, okay, David Shipley then, yeah.
Thank you. I was a sports editor for the Review, 71 to 70 to 71, I guess. And I remember I first covered fencing. And I can't remember when we dropped fencing as a sport at Oberlin. And Jane, I'm sorry, I don't remember that you fenced for the, we're doing anything. It is, I'm just oblivious or out of it in terms of all these things that happened when I was in school. I see a number of my classmates on this with like Larry Abraham and Dave Tempest and Nate Fawcett. This has been a great education for me. We were so male dominated.
Oblivious is the word.
What?
Oblivious is the word.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a 72-year-old male chauvinist pig. I'm sorry, but I was clueless that all this was going on when I was in school at Oberlin, and I was sports editor for the Review.
Thank you, Nate Fawcett. You're on mute, Nate.
There we go. Okay, I apologize for being on mute. I ran cross country and track. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I ran cross country and track from 65 through 69 and with Coach Tidwell. And I remember running with Kate Well. Hi, Kate. I think she was correct that the team as a whole felt supportive of her running, and we would have liked her to be able to go to meets. But I remember very distinctly her Coach Tidwell, had to take a stand, and he would say, no, I want you to run with us, but you can't go on the bus to go away. And I think he was under a lot of pressure from particularly, I think, the athletic director, Kyle, what was his name?
Lyle Butler.
Lyle Butler, thank you. He
Oh, God, yeah.
yeah, well, I think he had gotten feedback from some other coaches about not just Kate, but other people trying to run at other schools. And he just, I think, told Tidwell it's not going to happen at Oberlin or something of that sort. But I always, you know, I was very aware of it, and I was very aware of the limitations, but I sort of I'm a little hard on myself about, I feel like I should have been doing more about it, and I didn't. I mean, I just accepted it like a lot of people did. And it was very unfortunate. We all, Kate would come out there every single practice just about and run with us, you know. And then she had no place to compete. It was too bad. Now, I also should mention, I put it in the comments that my wife, Frances Leonard, at the time, was one of the members on that first swimming team that got together. And she has emphasized to me how hard, how they had to do it all themselves and how informal it was. And for example, only swimming 3 times a week. They had maybe a couple of meets, only a couple that first year. And it was, you know, they were doing their best, but it was a not supported activity. Let's just put it that way.
Susan Michaels had a question. Michaelis, I hope I pronounced it right, said, what are the strengths currently in women's athletics at Oberlin? And I'd like any of the panelists who know that. I know that the women's field hockey and soccer are a big deal. I don't know how other sports are. Any of the panelists know about that? You stick your hand up if you do. Anybody else in the audience?
Well,
David?
women's track has had, this is John Titus here. Women's track has had a lot of success, some really outstanding athletes in recent years, especially in the weights, but also distance running in relatively recent years. So they've done really well. Now, that may not be the essence of the question, but the team has been terrific.
Okay, Dave Tempest, you had a question?
Well, a couple of comments. First of all, yeah, women's sports is, I think the question from Susan and Peggy Littmann were both to the effect of, well, what are is there equity and opportunity now at Oberlin? And I think if you look at the work of Natalie Winkelfuss, who's the Delta Lodge director of athletics at Oberlin, the answer is yes. You look at the track team, you look at the swim team, you look at the breadth of activities that are available. I think they've come a long way, although they still have a lot of focus on diversity in general. And one of the ideas as a follow-up meeting to this one is to talk about where Oberlin has gone since this spectacular group went through. So that's the comment. The other thing I'll just end with is to say thank you to this group. You can see how each one of these people spearheaded change that led to all of our daughters having a great opportunity in sports. My daughter played soccer through college and ran track through college and would not have been able to do that in the 60s and 70s. So thank you very much to this group.
Before I go on to next, I want to have a quick one from Robert Grove Markwood. Bob?
Hi, Heather. Yeah, it was Bob Markwood back then, so a little name change in recent years. I was not involved with any of the teams that had women wanting to be a part of the team process. I think generally aware, but I was one of the few physical education majors. And I don't know if there are other majors.
I was almost one.
Almost. So there were a few, but I remember in recent decades, as I became more aware of the history that I lived through, but oblivious is one word, but also just the sort of being male in those late 60s, that the social structures, the entitlement that I just didn't question it because I had been raised in that in high school. You know, the basketball was different, so I never questioned it, and I feel a sense of shame in more recent and sort of need to publicly apologize to everyone else here who was limited by that structure. I've gone on to coach college women's soccer. I was a football player and a lacrosse player at Oberlin, and so know Heather through the lacrosse, but I'm just sometimes just stunned at how in my lifetime that was still stuff that was going on, even as just racial issues till today. So there's just lots of those social issues that I wish I was more aware of at that time. So that sense of apology and shame, but also gratitude for those of you who did that work of trying to change things.
Jane,
I
I'm
had
sorry.
to be aware.
Jane, you have an answer to that?
Yeah, a quick thought. I mean, I could see it in sports, but it was so embedded in our culture that I did not actually see it as much in the rest of the culture until after graduate school, when I was more professionally in the workforce. And it's amazing how much there was that I just, Oberlin is a special experience, and likewise in graduate school. And you feel the opportunities you have to advance. And that was just different from what I later ran into. So I understand how it would not have been immediately visible.
Yeah. But I also have this sense of irony. There was Oberlin, one of the most progressive colleges I could have gone to. And when I look back and think, oh my God, it's like, seriously? So, but we're not there anymore. And I hope we continue to change.
One other real quick experience, I could see, like in basketball, that the people coming in while, after, as I was, getting to be a senior, were a whole lot better. And I think it's because the opportunities they had. In high school, when I tried to raise the idea of having a women's team, I got this crazy, the boys have the gym. No, the boys have the gym. Yeah. And it was like, I couldn't understand what the PE teacher was telling me, and she must have thought I was nuts. But anyway, so they have more opportunity.
Tom Armstrong, you have a question?
Well, no, not a question.
Or a comment?
A comment. I'm class of 70, so I arrived when Kate did, and she and I have been friends ever since. And in answer to the earlier question, no, I didn't question it either. Although, it being more than 50 years ago, I don't remember exactly what I was thinking then, or in fact, if I was thinking. But Bob Grove Markwood's comment made me realize that, here we are 50 years later. We look back on that 50 years and we're astonished at how much different it is. With all the bad news that we're faced with these days, well, this is a sign of progress. We've got a long way to go, of course, but it's really different now, and that's a big improvement.
Maddie Kimmich. You need to unmute yourself.
Hi. Thanks, Heather. I don't know if you even remember me, but I was in your floor. You were a floor counselor at South my first year, I think. And you referred me to a camp job for a couple of years in the Adirondacks. But anyway, what I wanted to say was that I have to share what some of you have said about being very surprised and impressed by these stories, because I had no idea a lot of what you were doing to bring women up to equity in sports. But for me, coming from a suburban Maryland high school, I remember hiding the fact that I was a woman who was an athlete. And when I arrived at Oberlin, just being so overwhelmed and so happy that I immediately joined field hockey. I played on the basketball team, Sue. I vaguely remember you. It's just 1 year. I played on the tennis team. I mean, and in field hockey, we were competing with other schools. We were going in buses. I don't know how Mary Culhane made those things happen, but they did. I spent 2 years working with what I think was called the Women's Recreation Association, WRA.
Yeah.
Didn't we have that?
Yeah.
I did all kinds of things with a group of women trying to get women interested in sports, not at the competitive level, but just being able to realize how athletic we could be and how that made us still good women. It wasn't something to look down upon. So the piece I wanted to add is that I was gone from Oberlin from the fall of 70 until early in 72. But I participated in everything, swam every day, just on my own. For those first 2 years I was at Oberlin and loved all the opportunities to compete, played other schools, played other people. And when I came back in early 72, I was shaken to my roots at how different the athletics felt. That all of a sudden I felt like there is no way that I would ever be good enough to play on any of these teams that are out there, because I could see it immediately. It was like, wow, the quality is so different. It was fine. I was just about to graduate. I wasn't offended by it, but it was like, this Title IX thing really made a difference. I could just see it around me. So thank you.
Barb Golgus.
Hello. I just had a comment. I was there at Oberlin from 66 to 70, and my experience with athletics was similar to some of yours. When I came back after my freshman year, I worked at a summer job that did not make me happy. And so I ate my way through the summer, and I came back about 25 pounds heavier than when I left. So somehow I heard about the fact that women could have an unofficial swim team, and I was invited to join. And I remember the practices being right after our normal dinner time. So I learned the hard way not to eat dinner, because the first two practices I got about halfway through the practice and had to, race to the ladder and run to the locker room and throw up because I wasn't used to that kind of workout. I mean, I'd always been a swimmer just, for fun, but I remember participating in those, few and far between meets. And the value of it, first of all, I lost my 25 pounds fairly easily in the first few months from swimming, but it taught me that exercise was going to be key in maintaining my health forever. And so it became a part of my life there. And the other thing, the other sport that I participated in was during our very first winter term at Oberlin. We were there on campus in January, and several women decided to start a women's ice hockey club. And so it was just a handful of us that would meet out at the ice rink. And I think Fred Manier was one of our coaches, and I was dating Don Weber at the time, and I think he came. And I had grown up in North Carolina and could barely stay upright on skates, so I mostly used the hockey stick as a crutch. But we had wonderful games, and we loved it. And I remember Debbie Clark had a wicked slap shot, and I still have a scar on my shin because, of course, we had no equipment except the hockey sticks and the puck and skates. But that taught me that you can organize your own events. And so over the years, I have started groups that did this thing or that thing that I wanted to do that was beneficial to me. And I'm grateful for the opportunities at Oberlin, even though they were minimal compared to what they are today. But it was, the other people there, both men and women students. I don't remember getting much support, if any, from any of the faculty in those kind of situations, although we were allowed to use the rink. So somebody gave us permission for that. But I'm just grateful that it taught me that, sport and exercise are a key part of our lives, and you can make opportunities for yourself if you work at it.
Yeah, I think those of us who saw Phillips gym after and all the new stuff since then, after we all graduated, were like, hey. Yeah, it was Phillips Mudhole when we were there. And I also want to thank Mary Culhane, because she really did make an effort for a lot of us. She gave me a I did a, like, who was it? The fencing one, yeah, Jane. I did an honors project on movement in education and in working with children and stuff, on gymnastics and things like that, as one of my senior thesis projects. And it was really, really worthwhile. She was very supportive, even though she didn't have any budget. So let's see if I see any other hands. I'm writing something.
You want to tackle the question that Buddy asked about the Title IX?
Well, I wrote a private message to Buddy on that one. That I think that one probably needs to be its own topic, because it really wasn't relevant to us at that time and didn't exist at that time. And it's he was asking about people's opinions. Pardon? It's a much broader topic than we're trying to address. So I think we're going to hold off on that, Buddy. Larry, you had a question.
Actually, I just have a comment that I was in class of 71. I was one of 2 physical education majors in the class. Barbara's husband, George Golgus, was the other one. And one of the things that meant was we had to take a lot of classes related to physical activity and physical education. And one of the things I remember from that was that the history of physical activity, including physical activity for women, went back over a century at Oberlin. There was a woman hired to be a physical education instructor for women in 1880, named Delphine Hanna, who is recognized now by the physical education profession as one of the pioneers in the field. She taught there for over 40 years. She was the first woman in the country to become a full professor of physical education. She oversaw a tremendous program of physical activity, not intercollegiate athletics, but physical activity, including the first 2 years of a requirement for all students to take physical education for women. And maybe that's a topic for another.
That'd be interesting. My godmother, Catherine von Wenck, Miss Catherine von Wenck, was about this tall and had a strong Southern accent, although she'd lived in Oberlin a good deal of her life, was the director of women's recreation when my parents were at Oberlin. And then she was still there when we came to Oberlin. So she was a little physical education dynamo.
Well, I can just add then, I'll just add quickly, my personal story was that when when we went to Oberlin, we were assigned randomly to faculty members to be our advisors. And until we declared a major after our end of our sophomore year, we just stuck with whoever we were randomly assigned. I was randomly assigned to Sally Houston, who was in the physical education faculty and had taught my mother tennis at Denison College many years before that. So maybe that was one of the things that got me to go into physical education. I don't know.
Okay, we have Dave Tempest and then Kate Wall. Dave? I think you need to unmute. Trying to see where you are on here. You're still muted, I think, Dave.
Unmute, Dave.
Okay, so a quick comment on Buddy's question about how Oberlin and society is and should be addressing gender identity issues. I think that's exactly the reason to have the follow-up discussion with this, with Natalie involved, because she's deeply involved in this right now. And that would be and to address the question of not just women in sports, but diversity in general in sports, including that subcategory. So I think that that's a perfect lead into the follow-up sessions. We have a Zoom session we have sometime. The other thing I want to say, I know for a fact that a subgroup of our folks here, Dave Shipley, John Titus, Sid Auerbach, Nate, had the one of the key values of sport at Oberlin for us was our coaches and the mentorship we got from Dick Michaels, who's here, who I consider my mentor, and from Bill Tidwell, who I know for a fact the cross-country guys in the old days consider their mentor. And that's the thing. I wonder if the women in this group had a chance to gain that valuable mentorship and leadership from a coach. That was, and then the team experience, of course, combined with that, was the most valuable thing I think I got out of the sports. Yeah, there were accomplishments and stuff, but I think that was the most valuable thing.
Yeah, I'll speak
Lisa,
to that.
want to answer that?
Yes, I would like to speak to that. When Dick Michaels stood up to the Ohio Wesleyan coach and had us run, it felt to me like it wasn't because he was doing it for some cause. It was just because it was the right thing to do, just because it was the way to treat other fellow human beings as equals. And that had an enormous effect.
Anyone, any of the other panelists? I think several of you mentioned Bill Tidwell and Dick Michaels and Mary Culhane. Fred Schultz was very supportive for me for the most part, not entirely, but he did stand up to me when he was told not to. Okay, Kate and then Dave Shipley. You need to unmute, Kate.
Okay, I didn't press hard enough. There's one woman in the PE department at Oberlin, and I don't remember her name, but she let me do an extra run. It's called like a double, a morning run in addition to the evening workout. And I'd run to her house way outside of town, but then she'd drive me back in. And I can't remember, but that was really supportive. And Tidwell was wonderful, absolutely wonderful at mentoring. His skills, his coaching skills changed my form completely. The high school coach, I wasn't a high school runner, but he was minimally trained as a PE major in whatever that school and air conference was in Ohio, that's PE stuff. So does anyone remember what it was? It's one of our small college things. Anyway, I'm curious, Heather, you said your grandmother was a director of women in recreation. Was that in the town of Oberlin or in the college?
No, my godmother, and it was Oberlin College.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do David Shipley and then Margaret Cheney. Unless, Margaret, are you answering this question specifically?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Dick Michaels really set the tone in the workouts that were, I was diving in Phillips pool in the pool in Phillips, usually while the men's swim team was working out. And it was clear that he was kind of setting the sort of emotional tone in that, in those workouts and on that team. And then for me, Dan Millman was wonderful. It's hard to overestimate his effect.
Thank you. Okay, Dave, you need to unmute. There you go.
I just want to sort of follow up on what Dave Tempest said. I very much hope that the student athletes at Oberlin today have, sort of that experience that I had, that Dave had, that Larry Abraham had, where you connect with teammates and connect with your coach, and it lasts for 50 plus years. That's what it's all about with intercollegiate athletics. And the other point I want to make is Natalie Winkelfuss, our AD, is doing an amazing job. And, if go online and look at, Google Oberlin Athletics, we are great now, winning the North Coast Athletic Conference in a number of sports, women's cross country, women's track and field hockey. Things are, and, facilities are just so much better now than they were 50 years ago. So there's a lot to be positive about with where things have gone. And the other thing that I think we need to recognize, and Natalie will confirm this, and so will our admissions folks. Student athletes at Oberlin have fewer problems. They succeed, they do well, they're resilient, they can handle the issues that come up with being an undergraduate. And so we need more of them to come to Oberlin College. It's a men and women. It's really positive for the undergraduate program to have more student athletes. So let me wrap up there, and I'm speaking as a member of the Board of Trustees who's concerned about admissions.
Great. I don't see any more hands up, and I don't see any more questions that need to be. Am I missing anybody? Let me look at the next page, and I have to go back page to page. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Marty in just a couple minutes, but I just want to thank Buddy for the suggestion for another program. And we had talked about doing one with okay, Larry, in a minute, with Natalie, and the gender equity question is and how Oberlin is dealing with that and what her feelings are about that in the future are good questions to think about. Larry, do you have a final question here for us? You got a hand up, or is that just, no, that's just my little hand. Okay, I can move that all over the place. Sorry, I put it right in front of your face there, Larry. Okay, anybody, oh, Paul, did you have a question? No, you're just waving at me, okay. Anybody else? Last chance here, then I'll turn it over to Marty and I'll mute myself. Okie doke, back to Marty.
You're muting?
Yes.
And turning down your volume.
Yep.
Okay, I'm back, I think. I too want to thank all the panelists, Heather, everybody who helped put this together. And we have, as Dave said, been planning in the fall to do another program with Natalie Winkelfuss involved. And there were a number of questions about like facilities now compared to then, what's going on with the status of the women's teams now and the women's athletic opportunities now. And I think that's all what we'll be focused on in the fall. So those were appropriate questions for the next program. And then I can't remember, Doug, was the link to the honors thesis put in on the web pages? Dave had found an honor thesis from 1992 by Leland Brandt, a history.
So I haven't done that yet. I'll mail that out tomorrow morning, if that's okay.
Really interesting, and a lot of the coaches that were mentioned tonight are mentioned in there. And it's called The Evolution of Women's Intercollegiate Athletics at Oberlin College. And he graduated in 1992, so he's bringing it up, from the era of the great athletes we've had tonight. And then what changes were made in the departments, how Title IX affected everything, including investigations by the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights for Title IX, and that's all covered in that. So I would urge people, if you haven't read the bios of the panelists we had tonight, to do that. They were sent out with the program, and then also Doug's going to post that link to that program, to that paper. And when people are thinking about the difference now, and I can't speak for Oberlin, but in terms of women's sports and athletics, if you were a soccer family, we've been watching the women's national soccer team for 20 some years. They are exciting. They're great to watch. They've, I think, pushed things along, and they just got, I think last year, pay parity with the men's teams. Doesn't mean endorsements, but at least in terms of the compensation they get for playing on the team. And then the other one is, if you got a chance to watch the women's NCAA basketball tournament this year, it was amazing. And it was more exciting than the men's, to me, by far. So there's been a lot of changes, obviously. Change still needs to happen. So aside, wanted to thank everybody who came tonight too. There is another program beside the one on athletics for the fall. There's one that's more gelled than that, that's planned for the week of September 11th to 14th, something in that week. It's called How Oberlin Prepared Me for the Real World. And it's former conservatory students who took a variety of different paths after Oberlin, and how Oberlin, or how they successfully navigated that after leaving Oberlin. So I don't know if you got to be involved in here, the last conservatory one. I know Gary Kvistad's on, he was on that. It was a really fascinating and fun one to listen to. And I think this will be the same kind of program. So if anybody else, Doug or Dave, have anything for the good of the cause?
Okay.
You're good? You're good? Okay. Well, thank you all for joining tonight. I hope you'll come back for other programs. It was great to see everybody, old faces and new faces. Well, everybody's old face now, but you know, new faces in terms of relationship. Anyway, thanks so much. Have a great evening. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Marty and Heather and Doug and Dave.
Great to see you, Kate.